Good morning, everybody. Welcome to all those here this morning to the council meeting of Wednesday, the 28th of October. As always, this is an open session being live streamed, so please be aware of that. And please be cleaning the microphones, and if I could ask that you turn phones either off or to silent during the meeting. Apologies, there are none, and we've got Andrew on the screen behind us there. Acceptance of late items, I don't believe there are any at this stage, nor is there any confidential business to be transferred into the open. I'm not aware of a change of the order of business, which leads us to confirmation of the minutes. Are there any corrections to be made to the minutes that anybody would like to raise? Thank you. Nothing there at all. In that case, yes, I move that the minutes of the council meeting held on the 2nd of June 2020 be confirmed as a true and accurate record. Thank you very much, Tina, as seconder. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, abstentions, and carried. Thank you very much. Also, the minutes of the council meeting on the 13th of October. Are there any corrections to those minutes? In that case, I'll move that they be accepted. Can I have a second? Tina, thank you again. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, abstentions, and carried. Declarations of conflicts of interest. Are there any? Any updates on that? Deputations, presentations, petitions. I believe there are none, nor are there recommendations from other committees. Which leads us to Serial 10.1, the adoption of the Tauranga City Council Annual Plan 2019 and 20. Paul, are you going to talk us through this?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. So, annual report for 1920. I'll introduce the report. We have the finance team in the room, as well as the team doing the non-financial indicators, and we have Audit New Zealand present as well, both Clarence and Marie, who will present the audit report later on during the meeting. So, in terms of the final annual report, so we presented the draft annual report to Finance, Audit and Risk back in late September. There has been several changes around that report since that time. Most significant of these is some asset impairment, which has reduced the overall or surplus deficit down since that report. Overall for the year, the rate surplus is consistent with what we had in the Finance, Audit and Risk of 390,000. We have a deficit of 5.1 million. The large impacts compared to budget with that are to do with the asset write-downs, the Cayman apartment settlement, and the impacts of COVID-19 in terms of revenue streams impacting on that. So down from a deficit perspective, but consistent, and actually a small favourable rate surplus, which as was agreed through the annual plan process has been applied to the 2021 budget. From a debt perspective, final debt has a net figure of 525 million at a ratio level of 206%. So that debt is again slightly lower than what was planned in budget. Again, the capital program was impacted through COVID-19. Resulting in a capital program of 147 million compared to budget of 203 million. So overall, from a group perspective, so that's bringing in in particular Bay Venues revenue stream, that ratio goes down to 195%. In terms of non-financial measures, you can see in the report, I'll take that as read, in terms of the results achieved being 57%. Not achieved at 33%, and not assessed this year 10%. So at that point, I'll just open for any questions on the report.
Thank you, Paul. Are there any questions? I'm happy to move this from the chair, both A and B. If I can get a seconder. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Salisbury. Are there any questions on the report? Councillor Robson.
Apologies. I'm just looking at the agenda. Recommendations. Can you make clear what the recommendations are? Because there seem to be a number of recommendations, not just A and B. That's the obvious starting point.
Through the chair, in terms of process, A and B need to be adopted. Audit New Zealand will then present their audit report they haven't presented that as yet, so that's then C can be adopted.
Following, so A and B come first.
In which case, can we take it in parts? And if the mover and seconder aren't speaking to it, I'm happy to speak.
Sorry, you want to say A and B in parts?
Yeah, separately.
Receive the report and then approve it in parts.
There, A is receive and B is approve. If we can take those two separately,
Sure.
is that possible?
Okay. I do want to speak to it, but I'm happy to reserve, John.
Yeah. Okay, so speaking to the motion, I'm happy to support A. I'm uncomfortable with supporting B. There are some minor errors in the report that obviously haven't yet been addressed, but that's not the reason why I can't support B. I can't support B because the overall narrative at the front end of the report, I believe, would not be recognised. This organisation would not be recognised by the people of Tauranga based on the year they've experienced. I'm not going to go into specifics. I'm happy to, if challenged, run through the events, but I am concerned that in a year where our reputation fell as markedly as it did, we don't seem to have recognised, at least in the introduction to the report, that political legitimacy is enormously important for a council. It's a major issue for all of us on our Finance, Audit and Risk Committee. The reputation index is actually a critical risk for this council. We recognise it collectively as a council. And I just make the observation that how in an annual report we cannot recognise the issue we have with our reputation, yet in our Finance, Audit and Risk Committee discuss reputation as a critical risk, suggests that we are, I don't know, we're at odds with ourselves. We recognise the importance of reputation on one committee, but are able to sign off apparently a report where we don't recognise the issues we have with it, nor the drivers for that. To me, an annual report should give a pretty true and accurate reflection of basically where we are, what we've done, and what we're facing. And I don't believe that the introduction to this annual report does that. I have one or two questions specifically around numbers, whether we have over time accurately reflected and still currently reflect the cost of some of our CCOs, whether effectively we're communicating as transparently as we need to in some respects. Now, I'm Deputy Chair of the Finance, Audit and Risk Committee. These issues are not new to my colleagues, but it would be inconsistent of me to raise these issues in one committee and yet at the same time nod through this annual report. So for that reason, happy to support A, will vote no to B.
Thank you, John. Anybody else?
Could I just ask a question for clarification, Mayor Temby? And I'd have to, through you, to ask Councillor Robson. But when he talks about the introduction, can he be more specific what he's referring to? I know he had problems with the Mayor's message when we went through the draft, but I don't see a heading here in the report which says introduction, so I'm just trying to follow what he might be objecting to.
Look, I'm happy to, obviously I'm under no obligation. It's the curse of asking me a question, Councillor Baldock, something you've had some experience of, we know. Look, by the introduction, I mean that, but basically preceding the financial statements. So there's a number of sections of the report, 1, 2 and 3, it talks about highlights, but in those highlights I believe there is certain, I would have preferred to call it headlines, and I think there are 1 or 2 headlines that we've chosen for whatever reason not to put in there, and we should have. I come back to it that the report should give a true picture of where we are, what we've done, good and bad, and the challenges we're facing, good and bad. And I don't believe that the picture painted prior to the financial numbers, and even 1 or 2 of the financial numbers, are as accurate and as honest and as transparent as I would like them to be. Now, I know my colleagues hold a different position, and that's fine. I respect the democratic process. We've had these conversations, but it would be inconsistent of me to raise these issues in Finance, Audit and Risk Committee and go blind to them in a council meeting.
Anybody else? Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning. It's always an interesting one, adopting an annual report immediately following the conclusion of the previous triennium, because essentially the matters contained within the annual report are a reflection of the 1920 annual plan. So there are some things in here which the 1920 19 to 22 triennium has achieved. There's a few things in there like the elms, etc. But largely it's a report on the previous council's last annual plan. Look, personally I would have liked to have seen something there in terms of reputation, because that survey was conducted this triennium as opposed to the previous one. But that being said, it is largely a report of the performance or otherwise of the previous triennium. Thank you.
Anyone else? Councillor Waldock.
I'm certainly going to support receiving and adopting. And look forward to the auditors' reports, which I expect would highlight some of the financial concerns that have been raised by Councillor Robson, if they are that serious. But I agree with some of the comments that Councillor Morris makes. It's a bit of a split year. I do note that some of the dire predictions that were around prior to COVID about how much we would be impacted have thankfully not transpired, in particular for our ratepayers, who seem to have all managed from our reports yesterday to have managed to pay their rates, and I think by and large are glad the city is still functioning and performing as we go into this year. But these reports are historic. We had an opportunity to input into the draft, and I really appreciated that, and thank the staff that have taken on some of the things that we wanted to see changed, which is always available to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? In that case, taking it in parts, Council, I put to you Part A. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, abstentions, and sorry. Part A? Yeah, he said aye. Yeah. Thank you. That's carried unanimously. Part B approves the report 2019-2020. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Abstentions? And carried with Councillor Robson not supporting it. Thank you very much. This leads us, Paul, did you want to continue on?
Just ask Clarence and Marie to just present their audit report.
Good morning. We're in your very capable hands. Thank you.
Good morning, Your Worship and councillors. And yes, I'm really happy to be here. It's been quite a process to get here in a COVID year. There was a lot of additional time and effort that went into the preparation of this annual report. Just the impact of COVID on all the non-financial reporting and how that's disclosed took a huge amount of effort from management and also from us to audit that, as well as on the numbers, not only for council but also for the CCOs and how that flowed through to the consolidated numbers. It's a real good effort by management to be here. And when we issue our opinion, it means that we agree that it's materially correct. We don't say it's 100% correct. We audit to a materiality figure, and we are comfortable that it reflects. It's a fair reflection of the operations for the year. And it is a historical document, so it's not future focused. It is on the past year. So in our audit opinion, there's only one thing that I want to highlight, and that is, although it's unmodified or unqualified, it's modified in the sense that we have emphasis of matter paragraph referring to the disclosures around the COVID, the impact that COVID had, and that led to the carrying values of your investment properties, because investment properties are based on market market rates and that, and the valuers did identify that there's some more uncertainty around some of the assumptions that they're using. And then the overall impact about, in our opinion, just referring to the non-financial reporting as well, and the impact of those. So that is, I think it was really well covered off in the notes, as well as there's one specific note summarizing the impact of COVID-19. It's note, is it 39? Sorry, I should have memorized that one. Note 49. So that summarizes the impact of COVID. But I'm really happy to be here to present that opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Clarence. Marie, did you want to add to that at all?
Just wanted to thank the staff and the management that we've had to deal with through this time. It's been give and take on both sides because it has been challenging to get everything done. And your dates have not moved from the original setting for this end of October, whereas a lot of clients have. And so it's been stressful for everyone, and I'd like to thank everyone involved.
Very good, thank you. Councillor, I'm happy to move this from the chair. Appreciate there'll be questions. Councillor Cloud.
It's more of a process question. We don't seem to have it in our agenda, the actual audit report, unless we're missing it somewhere, unless I'm blind.
No, we only just got it from Audit New Zealand this morning, so I think, and Clarence should have copies of it with him. So if council wish a copy before they adopt, we can.
It'll be worth looking at it before we actually adopt it. Thank you.
What we'll do is take a 5-minute break while we get the report. Thank you. highlight other than what you previously mentioned around the impacts of COVID?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I have to apologise for this. We went right to the wire last night, giving clearance to council, so we were still busy with our reviews and our second director, and it came through late. The opinion that you have in front of you has got the draft on it, but that will, as you can see, I've signed that. That will be the opinion that will go into the annual report as is, once it's adopted. It is just because I can't issue my opinion until the financial statement or annual report has actually been adopted. That's why it's in the draft, but it will be, normally what we do is send it out and then it's just not made public until such time. Because of the lateness, we send it through in the draft, but that will be the opinion as is. On the audit findings that we had during the audit, as I said, the COVID was the biggest impact. That was a significant risk that flowed through all the financial statements and non-financial reporting. The other things that we looked at is the valuation of the weather tightness provision and the payments of that. In the previous years, there was quite big provisions. This year, it was the payment, so the provision is less, but the expense was quite high. We looked at some impairments that Paul touched on that came out of the overall audit. And then this year was quite interesting with the COVID, as I said, on the non-financial reporting. So a lot of time was spent on making sure that the reporting on that, on the non-financial reporting, actually made sense. So don't want to say not achieved, but you were actually on track to achieve it. So there was a lot of additional focus that went into that. In our audit plan, we also had the risk of management override that we highlighted as a significant audit risk. Again, we looked at the journals and some provisions and things that to make sure that there's no manipulation going on the results. So those were the big items that we focused on, but if there's any other questions, I can answer that as well.
Much appreciated, Clarence. Thank you very much. Council, any questions of Clarence? Councillor Bulldog, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Clarence. Just on this issue of the valuations, and I can now track it to your report and to page, whatever it is, 312, I think, where it is in the annual report. I'm just not quite sure why you are concerned. I can accept that it's worthy of noting that there is no real certainty. People expected some properties to dive and, you know, all the dire consequences that were predicted. But in actual fact, we've seen, certainly in the residential markets, and you're talking about investments, I know, but, you know, we've seen a boom nobody expected. So are you just noting the fact that it's not a reliable valuation, or are you actually concerned about the figures we have in this report? Can you clarify?
So through you, Mr. Worship, we're not unhappy with the valuation as it stands. What we're saying, there's valuation uncertainty. So it's based on the best information available. Also with valuations, at times it is if there's a short-term fluctuation, that won't be taken into account, and it's only long-term movements that will be taken into account. Because of COVID, when the valuation was done, it was just after lockdown, leading into 30 June. So there was way more uncertainty then than what there is now. And also, when you look at your other assets that you have that's valued at your optimized depreciated replacement cost, the impact of COVID on that was way less than on your investment properties that is more based on open market values and rents and things like that. So it's just about the uncertainty.
Thank you, Clarence. Council, any other questions? Thank you. In that case, I'm happy to move C through F, if I can get a seconder. Councillor Baldock, thank you very much. Just speaking to the whole motion from A through F, I just wanted to thank the staff for all the work they've done throughout the year. It has been a very challenging year, but it's a year where decisions have been made. And I don't accept much of what Councillor Robson said earlier at all, to be perfectly honest. While there has been, it has been cantankerous among councillors, this has been a significant time of progress and change for Tauranga City. It's been a time when decisions that the previous council couldn't make have been made, and an awful lot more in the process. So while some may be disappointed in the way that council is running, the reality, of course, is that we have made decisions, we have provided governance, and we've moved the city forward progressively. And if nothing else, The last general election of a week ago or so clearly showed that this city is looking for progression and not to be held back by the constraints and the lack of decision making that has plagued it in the past. Councillor Baldock, as the seconder, would you like to speak to the motion?
No, I'll reserve, thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank the Mayor for his invitation. Look, I request that it be put in parts, C through F, if that's possible. Speaking of the motion, there have been some very good decisions made in the last year. I think the best decision made was the decision to recognise the ongoing imbalance in our revenue model and the decision to start addressing the shortfall effectively relative on a benchmark basis in the commercial rating in the city. I think that was a brave decision by this council, and I thoroughly approved of it. That was a decision made in that last effectively year. That was a very, very good decision. There are always decisions, of course, people can disagree with, but the process by which one makes decisions and the political legitimacy one has with the confidence the community has in that decision making is just as important. There are some things I believe that the report should have celebrated more, one of them being the AEP. I think there should have been more emphasis done on UFTI, which of course came to a conclusion effectively in this last year, but was built on a very brave decision made to challenge the success narrative around smart growth, decision that was challenged by the previous council and the previous mayor, and also by the current CE, and which resulted in, thanks to work by one of our general managers, a jewel in local government capability, in effectively us resetting as a sub-region and initiating the UFTI process, which much work was done last year to bring to fruition. I think we should have celebrated that more in our annual report. My point is, it's about balance and about identifying those things which are genuinely significant for the city. And it's also about acknowledging that we are part of a river, that there are decisions made by predecessors that are good and we have been able to build upon. There are decisions made by predecessors that we feel perhaps were less good and we have successfully changed. I come back to the direction around our funding model. And then there are, of course, is how we've gone about making our decisions and whether we've successfully taken our community with us. And as we know, it's not a subject of this annual report, but I'm sure it will be a subject, if we are honest, in the next annual report, is the curbside issue, which I have supported since day one. We have somehow managed to leave a significant part of our community behind in that process. And this is the sort of thing I think annual reports need to acknowledge. If we fail to acknowledge history, and here Tangata Whenua have lessons for us if we're prepared to listen, if we fail to acknowledge history, we are in no way able to learn from it. And in that regard, one of the failures that we've done over the last 12 months is we've failed to resource Tangata Whenua again to successfully engage and contribute to the direction setting in the city. There are tensions we know within that community, tensions between them and some of the actions taken recently. On a different topic, the Homelessness Task Force, I think, did some extraordinarily good work in terms of recognising and bringing to the central government's attention the fact that Tauranga is not some rich enclave. So there are things missing from the report, good and bad, and that's my point. It's not about being negative, it's about being honest. And for too often we see in this city, and we've been in this situation for years, when someone asks a question, they are chastised rather than honoured with an open, inclusive, transparent and honest response. We need to up our game.
Anyone else? Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Mayor. So moving forward, concluding the annual report and moving forward into the LTP, we can see yet again the non-financial measures for council are again pretty poor reading. As a matter of fact, only 57% of the measures were achieved. So 10% of those measures were unable to be assessed, which is an issue. But also, I don't think it's as simple as saying perhaps that there was an issue with performance. Some of the measures are, in my view, actually unrealistic. And I go back to one of the measures, I think it's with Bay Court, and the Bay Court measure was a third community use, a third commercial use, and then a third subsidised something or other use. And that doesn't fit with who the users of Bay Court are, so council always gets a fail in terms of that measure. So moving into the LTP, I would like us to have some good thought around what are some realistic measures, and then we can measure them, and we can hold ourselves and our community can hold us to account on that. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other councillors? Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Bullock.
Thank you, Mayor Temby. I agree with much of what Councillor Robson had to say. I would certainly support him in celebrating many of the good things that were done in this last year. I think there's a slight error in when we started to change our rating base and our financial income base with the differential decisions, which began in 2018 in the LTP and followed through. But we did tweak it last year with the further reduction in the UAGC, and I think this will be a good discussion in our current LTP when it comes. But he mentioned the TSB. I think it's one of the great things we have underway, and we started that in the last year. We're finally getting on top of a decent plan for our transport issues, which is number one in the community's concerns. UFTI is a spatial plan which is beginning to getting into the issue of our housing needs and ultimately the whole issue of housing affordability, given that we're now seeing house prices still going up, post-COVID. The other thing I'd like to mention, which is different, but the CBD, which we need to see become all it can be, and there were two decisions. One, the Wharf Street upgrade, which I'm sure you wouldn't be surprised for me to mention, which is about to open soon, and Elizabeth Street, which is sending the signal to our partners, the development community, that they will engage in this redevelopment and of the CBD with the living, with hotels, with other new retail offers and business and office accommodation and so on. And those decisions are mentioned in our report, and I think they're really ones we can be proud of. Curbside, I think, is going to be a challenge, as you said, Councillor Robson. But that decision was August 25th, and I hope we stick with the decisions we make by majority in this chamber. Unlike Elizabeth Street, which was tried to be overturned on a number of occasions. Homelessness is a very good example of how some really good progress is being made. The task force there is doing great work. And I agree with Councillor Morris too. I'm probably just echoing much of what's been said, but we do need realistic measures. I think sometimes we sort of set the bar a bit too high. And so we will look at that during the LTP, but I can commend this report to the community for the very few of them that will read it from cover to cover, as we know. But I believe on balance it does give the right messages about that last year and our performance, but our achievements and so on. Thank you.
Thanks, Larry. Anyone else? In that case, Councillor Robson wanted this taken in parts. Happy to do that. I'll put to you, Council, so we're talking on your agenda, page 3, I think it is. C, that we received the report. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Abstentions? Carried. D, adopts the audited Tauranga City Council report. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Abstentions? And carried. Councillor Robson. E, authorises the Chief Executive to make any necessary minor numerical drafting presentation amendments. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Abstentions? and carried, and approves the transfer of rate surplus for the 2019-20 period. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, abstentions, and carried, Council. Thank you very much. This leads us to 10.2, the Pōtēriao o Mauao Annual Information Report. And who is... Kirsten. Clarence and Marie, thank you very much. Much appreciated. Josh, yeah.
Nick as well.
Kirsten, Nick and Josh, welcome. Having a bit of beard envy over here, just quietly. To be clear, I was talking to the boys. Thanks. We're in your very capable hands. Thank you.
Morena koto. So I'm Kirsten Hauschild. I'm the Parks and Reserves Advisor in Moa, and this is Nick Lynch-Watson, Principal Parks and Reserves Advisor, and Josh Clark, Natural Environment Advisor Moa. So Josh and I are actually new this year to TCC, so here to talk to you today about the Ngā Pōtēriao Moa Annual Information Report, which was adopted at the last meeting, which was on the 7th of October, and asking that you receive this report today. So we'll take it as read, but like to add some comments to that, if I may. Cool. So first of all, on behalf of Dean Flavel, who is the chair of Ngā Pōtēriao Moa, wanted to thank the dedication of Moa Trust, tangata whenua, councillors, staff, working groups, contractors, non-profit groups and volunteers for all they do for Moa. And throughout the year he's received positive feedback and is pleased to see how proactive the community has been, highlighting improvements such as the installation of the AEDs and noting respect for decisions that have been made. And so this report outlines the functions and the structure of Ngā Pōtēriao Moa as a joint administration board consisting of Moa Trust and council representatives for the Moa Historic Reserve, which is owned by the Moa Trust. So this report provides a summary of the meetings during the 2019 and 2020 financial year, and you'll be well aware that COVID-19 has impacted meetings in progress. However, there are many projects and achievements for the year which are described in this report, some which come under Te Mahere Whakamahinga o Moa, which is the Moa Implementation Plan, some staff and community initiatives, and ongoing operational work, which includes keeping tracks well maintained, reducing erosion, protecting heritage features, controlling pests, and many types of monitoring and maintenance work. And throughout this financial year 1920, some key projects to highlight are the success of the Animal Pest Control Program, mapping of archaeological features, which is now in the Tauranga City Council Geographical Information Systems, base track remediation work, the initiation of the Trail Rider project, which is ongoing, which gives access using a adaptive outdoor wheelchair to those who are elderly or mobility impaired. The placemaking and interpretation design work to provide branding for publications and signage, and placemaking designs which are informative and highlight sites of significance on Moa. The Korowai project, which brings the ongoing restoration and planting into a plan, which has a working group. So these last three projects I've highlighted are ongoing, and there are many others in this financial year which are well underway, and it's exciting to quickly progress these. So thank you.
Do you want to add anything to that at all? Please feel free to. Councillors that have been involved in this particularly, do you want to?
Well, I'm happy to move but in terms of questions, I just wanted to ask, in terms of the placemaking and interpretation signage, and some of us have been privileged to be involved in that as it's been developed over the last year or so. At what point will it be at a stage where it can be made public, or at least amongst councillors in a broader sense, because there's some fantastic work that's been done, and I think when people get to see it, they'll be pretty excited by what they see in terms of the overall creativity, the design, but also, more importantly, the actual stories that are going to be revealed relating to Moal. So at what point is it going to be completed, that project?
The design work is in the finalisation stage now, so it's been designed by Law Creative, which is Brendan Law, and finalising the designs at the moment, and the writing, which is to go on the sign and explaining the stories of Moal, is underway, so there's a copywriter engaged in that, and it will be within this financial year.
Councillor Hughes.
I just also want to say it's just been a really pleasure to be involved in this committee and in the process, and it's a super passionate team. The Korowai project is exciting, looking at how we can cloak Moal but keeping in mind the heritage needs and aspirations of tangata whenua. Has been done in real partnership with tangata whenua, which has been really lovely to see. The law and creative guys are just so creative. They've just really worked in conjunction with the stories, and I think that as Councillor Clout said, once we can reveal those plans, it's really going to come together in a pretty exciting project for the Maunga. So thanks everybody for your hard work, and looking forward to the next phase.
Thank you very much. Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Granger.
Thank you. When I was on the committee last term, it was actually brought to our attention about the trail rider. Does that ring a bell? And I still got a bit of interest, and I see this further investigation being done. Could you just put us in the picture where we're at with that now? I know it's going to come back to us, but where it is, and...
In fact, I think there's been another issue, has there not, recently?
At this point, so within this financial year now, it's been approved by Ngāputirua Moal and Gontamao Trust. Permissions have been sought, and at the moment promotional material has been made. The trail rider is here now, and there has been a trial up the Maunga that yeah, so it's well underway.
How did that trial go, by the way? Was it quite successful? And
Oh, I'll let Josh speak to that one. He got to be there for that.
Yeah, it was definitely successful. It does take fitness and mental staying power, because you have to be on the point, but I think what it's going to provide for the community is just amazing. So, yep, successful overall. We just have to have some points to help people use it correctly. Yeah. So.
no, that sounds fantastic. I'm looking forward to it actually once it's in operation, for sure.
Councillor Hughes, did you have a supplement?
For me, by the way, yeah.
Oh, good team building exercise, Bill. Councillor Hughes.
Just have a question around the rock climbing and the hang gliding people that have come to see the committee. I wondered whether you might want to give the team a little update on where things were at with them, because it's that interface between our recreation on the mountain and cultural needs, and also needs of the community, is something that's increasingly felt, I think.
Regarding the rock climbing, a decision was made to ban rock climbing on Moal. There was a lot of reports and discussion around that, and it wasn't a decision that was made lightly, but that decision has been made and respected by the rock climbing community. So, yeah, we thank them for their respect in that decision that's been made. And as for the paragliding and hang gliding, that club is they're in contact. They've given us their annual report recently. They just discussed it at the 7th October meeting, and there's regarding the rules that and guidelines which have been set for their use on Moal.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Just, I recall at one point, I haven't been up the top for the last 8 weeks, as you'd understand, but the issue of the way they launch off that platform, almost at the top of the four-wheel drive track, is that part of the rules that are being implemented there? Because they almost block the whole track at some points. Is that part of the rule?
Within the rules, there's an aerial which marks the 3 sites which they can take off from.
Is that still one of the places?
Yes.
And is there any controls or rules there that, as they do so, crowds gather to watch them and so on, and then you find people can hardly make their way through it? I just wonder if that's been a discussion at the committee.
I haven't been present for any discussions about crowds gathering. That may be before my time. I'm not sure if anyone else can address that.
Thanks, Kirsten. Yes, Councillor Cutt, and a seconder? Councillor Morris. Thank you. Did you want to speak to that?
Yes, thank you. Briefly. Thanks very much, guys. I'm privileged to be the Deputy Chair of Ngā Pōturi or Mowal. And, when you look at Mowal, it is the gift that keeps on giving for our community. I think we all appreciate its iconic value. Both tangata whenua and all the other residents of Tauranga Moana and visitors alike. And just to sort of highlight a few of the real positives, obviously there's been the base track remediation, which has concluded successfully and well under budget. Pest control, you'll notice there's a graph there which shows the rabbit numbers have really plummeted over the last few years, and that's a real positive as well. The trail rider, which has been mentioned, what wasn't mentioned is that there's now a defibrillator, if I get the word right, defibrillator now on Mowal, and that adds to the safety aspects of the moanga. And then there was also actually a new app called the Arataki Trails, and that app now, you can go around the moanga and actually, look at the various places where you are, and the stories are there electronically. We've got a very excellent relationship with Mowal Trust, and we are working very collaboratively with them in a joint management arrangement. And I just have to say, the staff, really are wonderful in their job. They're very passionate about what they're doing there, and so again, it's a credit to them. So thank you very much, everyone.
Councillor Morris.
Thank you. I also want to commend this report to colleagues. It's been 12 years since Mowal was vested in the Mowal Trust, and I have to say, participating in the committee meetings, our partners who have been appointed by the Mowal Trust aren't the type to sort of throw around their private property rights. There's a real consensus around the table, a real partnership around the table, and a real respect for each other's views. In fact, I think we probably only had one vote that wasn't unanimous, and that was only because one member voted against it. Chair Dean Flavel, the consensus way in which he chairs is really, really much appreciated, and we get to good places together. I suspect there may be differing views around closing Mowal for a rest day once a year, but I know that we'll work through that together. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just also wanted to thank the Ngā Pūturi team for all that you've done, the councillors and the staff. The team of now, guys, thank you very much for all that you've done. It is, as everybody said, it's a critically important moanga, and more than that, in iwidom, it's a person, and it's great I can't wait to see the work that you've done, all of you unfold, and I think it's really, really special for the region. So thank you. Councillor Kitty.
I too want to echo what my colleagues have said. Being on that committee has been amazing. I think Dean Flavel chairs it incredibly well. There's a mutual respect in the room, and we all get to have our say. Although sometimes we are talking from different pages, we all come together really, really well to express, and again, what Councillor Morris said, come to usually a unanimous decision on something. There are quite a few issues there, and again, the defib was one thing that we managed to talk through and for the health and well-being of everybody involved up there, especially with what happened, I think it was February last year. That was, and I'd like to thank the people who thought of that idea and actually presented it to us in a submission. So again, nothing but absolutely, we love being on that committee and hearing what everyone has to say. It's great, and again, commend Dean Flavel. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Cuddy. Anyone else? In that case, Councillor, I'll put this to you. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, abstentions, and carried, which leads us to 10.3, the TSP. Andy and Alistair, thank you very much.
Right, I can quickly introduce this item and then hand over to Alistair. So I'm just sitting in for Christine Jones in her role as General Manager Strategy and Growth today. Today we're just presenting an update and some significant milestones on the Transport System Plan project. As we all know and has been discussed in this chamber this morning, our transport network is under some real pressure, and our community continue to feed back to us on those matters. We've developed and agreed earlier this year a plan through the UFTI project to address that, and we've quickly moved to further develop that through the Transport System Plan project. As I mentioned, there's some significant milestones today in terms of the first phase of that project, which is the Transport System Operating Framework, which I will hand over to Alistair in a moment to speak to in more detail. And this is very much just the first phase of delivery of this project. This has been endorsed at the recent October Smart Growth Leadership Group meeting. So Alistair, I'll just hand over to you to go through in some further detail.
Thanks, Andy. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Council. So this paper seeks to provide you with an update on the Transport System Plan project and Phase 1 delivery, and its use, or the outputs of Phase 1 and its use in the development of the long-term plan and regional land transport plan and other planning processes. I do have a set of slides, but I wonder whether they will look quite familiar to those who have attended recent Smart Growth and Joint Council briefings on these, but I can work through those if that helps us just step through the paper. Just in terms of context setting, you'll be familiar with the image on the screen. That's UFTI's Connected Centres program. The TSP is the key transport arm and focused piece of work that now progresses the transport elements of UFTI. And on the left-hand side of that image, it shows that TSP project sits underneath UFTI and is a partnership project across Tangata Whenua, Port of Tauranga, Waka Kotahi, the New Zealand Transport Agency, QRail, the Regional Council, Western Bay, Priority One, and ourselves. And I think that's just a recognition that the issues we're facing, the opportunities that are presenting themselves, can't be addressed alone. It's a partnership initiative, and it'll be a partnership program going forward to achieve the outcomes that UFTI and TSP have identified. TSP process in Phase 1 is very much a technical process defined to us by Waka Kotahi, known as developing an operating framework. It's a 5-step process, looking at network and places, then looking at your modal priorities, and then doing technical analysis around the safety issues that are presenting in the network, and then transport modelling analysis and network performance analysis. That analysis is represented in part on that diagram towards the centre, but I guess the broader diagram itself shows how we have developed this Phase 1 of the project. So taking government direction and local strategy direction, and then translating that through the sort of technical tools that we have, either in existence or have had developed to support this project, to then identify gaps, network gaps, and then options to respond to those gaps. Those options ultimately lead to activities that can be considered through the long-term planning process and regional land transport plan process. And I guess key to the development and implementation of this process is that it's been partnership across those 7 organisations. I apologise for the size of that. It is appended in report 3 in a far more readable version, but essentially that is the output of the operating framework. It sets out the gaps and then the options to help respond to those network gaps, and then the sort of pink or reddish images to the right hand side shows the sensitivity testing of the options that we looked at, just to understand whether those priority network gaps we'd identified are still priorities when we test different outcome weightings. Once we did that analysis, we get the outputs from the SOF. So there's a set of studies, a set of ready-to-go projects, and a set of more complex business cases to progress for those issues that are a little more involved than some of the ready-to-go projects. From a policy perspective, there's a list there of the types of issues we think are needed to help support that system focus of this project, so not just infrastructure focus. Some of those activities will be led by other partners, and probably some of those will be nationally led in terms of hydrogen uptake strategy as one example. Other outputs from the phase 1 work, what's known as the TSOF, System Operating Framework, some short-term implementation activities, and this is around supporting the bus services to be more effective and efficient, and also some of the information that we can provide to those wanting to use the bus services so that it's more convenient for their use. And also just noting the continued rollout of the primary cycle network. The first phase of the work also identified a number of projects related to supporting urban growth. I don't think there's any surprises there. They look all pretty familiar, and support those known growth areas and identified planned growth areas in the east at Te Tumu, sort of central city into Papa, and in the west at Tauriko. There are also other themed projects which the identified to progress in the first 0 to 3 year period. Some of these are business cases, but they're, I guess, have elements of supporting growth, but they have that wider outcome focus around supporting the freight movement, particularly around Hewlett's Road, and improving safety in those key areas where safety was identified as key risk areas, and that was particularly in the Te Papa Peninsula area, partly in Welcome Bay area, and certainly in the Arataki area. The project also identified some key business cases which need to progress, and one of those was around how we get a combined bus service and infrastructure design developed. The other 2 areas focus on those 2 key corridors which are probably most pressured and are well supported by community feedback, being Hewlett's sub-area and the Turret 15th and Welcome Bay Road route. Some of the examples of projects that are in the indicative 4 to 10 year program, some of these will be confirmed through those business cases progressed in the first stage of work, and that's particularly around the final location for park and ride facilities and PT facilities in areas like the Te Papa Peninsula. That list of activities leads to a program that we can then cost and submit to the LTP and RLTP for, I guess, public feedback, but also prioritisation through regional transport committee processes. This is simply just acknowledgement of those committed activities which are already funded and progressing towards construction. This is an image of just showing the cost allocation across the partnership. The key transport partners. The TCC share is in the light grey on the right-hand side, and you'll note the agents at Waka Kotahi share both in the yellow and in the blue representing the funding assistance rate contribution towards those other activities of the other partners, including Western Bay and the Regional Council.
And then these tables show more detailed analysis. They're also appended to the agenda of the activities in the 0 to 3 and 4 to 10 year period from a policy and a low cost, low risk perspective. That's the under $2 million implementation activity class from the Waka Kotahi. A broader list of the activities from a technical analysis that would progress through planning phases in the 0 to 3 year period. So that's the plan design phase, and ultimately some of the construction activities that we're programming for 0 to 3. Some of those will extend, given their complexity and scale, into the 4 to 10 year period. Again, these are the activities which would be subject to confirmation through business cases, progress through that 0 to 3 year period. So they are indicative at this stage, but they relate back to those network gaps that the SOF process, the System Operating Framework process, has identified. Again, some further construction signal for 4 to 10. And I guess important to note, the next steps with the project would be to, subject to Council's agreement today, to submit the technical analysis for use in the long-term plan and regional land transport plan processes. As part of that, there is wider community engagement, and there is also a prioritisation process through the Regional Transport Committee RLTP development process. It's probably just as a final point, it's also worth noting that these, or the outputs of stage 1 are being considered for endorsement by the other partners to this process. The Transport Agency is probably key to that as one of the main investors in this program of activities. They've identified that there are no showstoppers in the work to date. They're supportive of the direction of the work. What they are reinforcing to us, though, that it is very important that we continue to show that connection between investment in the transport system and achievement of that urban form concept that UFTI has identified, so the connected centres program. They're also signalling to us that there's a need to really focus on getting the last out of the network as it is now. So these are these optimisation activities before significant further investment in places like Hewletts or 15th Ave can be supported. And there are activities in the TSP program to support that and to run in parallel while we develop the business cases for those key routes. That's where we're at.
Thanks, Alistair. That's fantastic. I'm happy to move this from the chair. I appreciate there'll be some questions. You happy to second, Larry? Okay, thank you. Kelvin, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Alistair. This is probably a question to Paul. To what extent are the projects that are identified in the 0 to 3 and the 4 to 10 years already in our LTP from the 2018 to 2028 LTP period? How many, or is this all additional which has to go into the next one? Thank you.
Chair, it is a mixture, and currently we've loaded some of those are included within the 21-31 LTP. We're just working through that process at the moment in terms of updating for these additional information. So that's happening at the moment. A lot of it will be additional, though. That wasn't in there.
So are we, I mean, given that we've committed to this, is every project going to be in the LTP and then we sort of knock them out as we go, or are we starting from a lower point and then adding some in? It's very important that we get that in the right order.
Yeah, so if you remember the two scenarios, so scenario 1 and scenario 2, so these will be mixed across those scenarios, and we'll bring that back to council, and that will be part of the overall prioritisation process that we work through in terms of the LTP.
Councillor Hughes.
Paul, just to you, in the last LTP there was 100 million put aside for the cycle action plan, and that was with a FAR rate of 75% from government at that point, and so that hasn't been spent in this LTP. So where does that sit for the next LTP, and how much are we looking at to spend on cycling that it's already existing in our LTP?
I can't answer fully. The amounts will still be reset into the new LTP, and then we'll bring that back in terms of what the cycle program will be updated into the new LTP. So, yeah, unless Alistair can add further in terms of what's in the new numbers.
Sorry. So the priority focus for the cycle plan implementation at this stage is based on two areas in the next, or two key areas in the next LTP. One is known as Area A, so the Otamotai, Brookfield, Bellevue area, and then Area B, which is in the sort of Mount Arataki area. Area A is essentially progress the planning for the 0 to 3, looking at possibly some implementation from year 3 onwards. Area B, Otamoto, Brookfield, Bellevue, is looking at implementation in the 0 to 3. There is other cycle plan or cycle outcome benefit type investment in places like Te Papa particularly, but it's probably more from a safety perspective rather than the sort of broader cycle plan focus of areas A and B for the first instance. And there are figures in those tables, but it's probably easier. I could provide a sort of bit of information post-committee if that suited the council.
Supplementary, if I may. So after the last LTP, there was massive high-fiving around the whole of the cycle community, and then nothing happened. So there's a little bit of mistrust in terms of whether money actually will get spent and where that money goes, and tracking that kind of finance over time. So how do we recognise and report and track where this money goes and where it's carried over and where new investment comes in, so that it's really recognised that that money gets carried over and used for projects that have already been apparently
So through each annual planning process, effectively we will reset that, whether an annual plan or an LTP. That will include looking at what the spend of, for example, the cycle plan had been for that year, what was planned for the following year, whether we rebudget any of unspent amounts or carry it forward. So each year that process will happen. So and be updated for the latest information, effectively that's included in that LTP going forward. So if for example, and I'm sorry, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but if there's an allocation in the current financial year for Cycle Lane, that will be reported on throughout the year. It will then be, if it's not spent, the option will be to rebudget it into the next LTP, and that conversation will happen through that process again.
Thank you.
Can I just supplementary on that? Not trying to be smart, but I just... the point that Heidi raises is important, because when we said 100 million in that LTP, most people think we collected it and it's now sitting in a pot somewhere and hasn't been spent. But actually, spread it over 10 years and take off the far rate at 75, there's only little bits of money each year that were kind of allocated for that. And so I'm just, is that correct? Is my understanding of that correct?
That's correct. So the 100 million would be in there, but it would have a contribution of 75 million effectively coming through from NZTO. So the net debt impact for us will be 25 million over that 10-year period.
Our rate has, kind of disappeared really at 75.
Larry, anybody else? Councillor Robson. Here.
I just have one more question around the the business case aligning bus services with bus infrastructure. So does that mean, I was at the PT meeting yesterday and there was a lot of questions raised around where are our bloody bus shelters, basically. So I'm just wondering, what does that mean now? Is that all go into, because it obviously makes sense to align, we don't want to go throwing bus infrastructure in when the routes aren't set up, etc. So how does that look as far as timing goes, and when does the funding then pop out of that in terms of things like bus stops, and are there bus stops and things that are in the first and second year that will appease the masses? Thanks.
So there's two broader activities. One is focused on where we've got certainty of bus routes, and there is money allocated to support the provision of bus stops in years 0 to 3 in the LTP for your consideration when that comes forward. And then there's also money allocated for your consideration in terms of continued rollout of the public transport real-time program across the city. So, and that's where we've got, I guess, the most confidence in terms of the bus routes and their, I guess, their longer term running on those routes. The combined business case for services and infrastructure is a longer term focus. So that would look at how do we better integrate the two services and what are those bigger facilities required to support that, which are, I guess, park and ride facilities, bus facilities in places that have been identified through the analysis, places like the hospital area or Greerton, Bethlehem, possibly Te Puna, and in the east around, say, Domain Road or at Paengaroa or Wairaki. So that's the sort of the longer term combined business case. So there's sort of two activities. One to get on and do now because we've got a reasonable level of certainty around the where buses will run over the longer term, and then the broader business case over the longer term to look at those larger, more complex facilities.
Very good. Any other questions? So speaking to the Councillor Robson, as you wanted to, I'll reserve.
Yeah, look, this plays nicely into the narrative that came out of the annual report discussions. This is where we are in a journey which started with smart growth and then the gap analysis, then UFTI and the TSP, and there's a natural flow here. And we're building on decisions made. For instance, one of the decisions made by a previous council was to invest in modelling and bring our modelling from literally last century into this century, to commit to collecting data to inform that. So I'm reasonably comfortable supporting where we are in this process, acknowledging that we're standing on the shoulders, perhaps not of giants, but of colleagues of the past, and the colleagues of the future will hopefully praise the work we're doing here as long as we lay a sound foundation for them. This is flowing, these decisions effectively are going into the RLTP and RLTP process. In the peer review around UFTI, it raised a couple of issues. One was governance structure and the other is funding. And of course the LTP is where we put our money, where so far only our mouths have been, and make that decision. The whole UFTI process, of course, was peer reviewed. David Brash did a very good peer review, and I'll cycle back to the point made in that peer review was around tangata whenua engagement or failure in that area. And in this chamber, not very many days ago, councillors on the regional council, Māori councillors on the regional council left the room because they made a point, and they made a point by leaving, about how they feel they've been engaged in this process. And of course, people on TCC all recognise the fact that UFTI got to a point of actually drawing a line through Matapihi, thereby showing no sensitivity at all to at least one local group of Māori and their mana in this place. There is also the issue very ably described by the conversation we've just heard between Councillor Heidi Hughes and Councillor Larry Baldock. There was, in my view, a fundamental dishonesty with the numbers we paraded publicly and in headlines in the paper around the cycle network, right? We put a number in that we knew wasn't going to be delivered for cycling, but the cycling group approved, and we really annoyed the motoring community because they thought that we had taken $100 million that they thought should have gone on roads. We did not effectively have an honest conversation with our community, which brings me back to UFTI and TSP need to be engaged with our community, honestly, openly, and take them with us. That's really, really important for us not to fail through the LTP process, to put the money in place, to make all the investment that's happened to date, and all the commitments happened to date, and the connection to central government, and the connection to Waka Kotahi, real and effective. So I would urge that in agreeing to this, we're cognizant of the need to bring all our community with us with honest and open and very transparent engagement. Don't look for political wins and headlines that effectively mislead, create expectations we won't deliver, and set us up to fail. That will not serve subsequent generations in this chamber well. Where we are today, I'm happy with. Evidence-based, peer-reviewed, disciplined, challenged. This is good work, and I thank the staff for it.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Morris.
Thank you. Yeah, just riffing off what Councillor Robson said about that political river or the continuum. A few rapids on the way, a few smooth patches, but this is the latest iteration in a process that's been going on for at least the last 20 years. And there was a fantastic document published by Smart Growth called When Political Will Triumphs Over Political Ego. And there was a picture in that document of, I think, Mayor Maureen Anderson, Mayor Noel Pope, and I think it was Chair Kearney, all cutting a cake together as they embarked on the smart growth journey. And one shouldn't actually underplay the role that former Chief Executive Paula Thompson played in the formation of smart growth. And while smart growth, has had its ups and downs, it's certainly been a foundation piece or a touchstone for central government in terms of funding some significant roadworks in our city. So the Tauranga Eastern Link, for example, the Harbour Link project, B2B, which is ongoing, and the Tauranga Northern Link, which would almost be finished now if the project wasn't cancelled 3 years ago, but is now back on the books with what looks like a bus lane. Very interesting. So, that represents, inflation adjusted, probably over $2 billion worth of investment by the Crown in our sub-region. And so, while we're not sort of standing on the shoulders of giants, because some of the mayors and chairs were reasonably short in stature and height, we are where we are today because of them. And I mean, this latest iteration, the TSP, of course, was kicked off last triennium with a meeting between then Mayor Brownless and Chair Leader and Mayor Gary Webber. So it's good. One thing does give me pause and does lead me to be a reluctant supporter of the TSP, and that is, if you look in our reports, paragraph 15. And I think paragraph 15 is where we've kind of said the quiet bit out loud. And that is where it says that by achieving the objectives and improving safety and increasing travel by public transport, walking and cycling will not improve travel times or reliability for private vehicles. As corridor space is limited in some areas, it may, I think we could say will, take longer to travel by private car in the future than it does now. And that's not just referencing increased congestion, that is a policy shift from government and from councils which are reliant, quite frankly, on government funding to support other modes to the detriment of the private motorist. And that, as somebody who is a, classical liberal who values individual freedom and movement, it kind of really grates against every fibre of my being that we would penalise and seek to force people out of their cars by literally imposing further congestion on them. But hey, I mean, we do have to, we are a supplicant to the transport Marxists in terms of funding, so we've got to do what we have to do. But otherwise, it's a long journey. We are where we are, and one day the government will change. But as has been seen in politics for many years, sometimes the parties change, but the actual policy doesn't. So yeah, thank you.
Councillor Hughes.
Steve, where do you start? I think reading about induced demand could be something that a good little study for Steve to do around bringing the policy to cater for more cars and more cars and more cars will give us LA, which is covered in tarmac and covered in roads, and that's not what our communities want. Our communities want to be able to get around safely. They want to be in a healthy environment. They don't want to see their whole landscape covered in in roads. So the only way to be able to avoid that, and it's been proven overseas time and time again, is multimodal solutions to transport. So, and that is what is trying to happen within the TSP, and that's what we will hopefully, with our vision for after live, learn, work and play, that people can get around in their own communities and not have to be in a choked up car environment, and be able to get around by bike, be able to get around cheaply by public transport, just as they can in some European countries, which we kind of aspire to in terms of planning. The one thing about this that I would like to see more aspiration in the 1 to 3 to 5 years. I'd like to see more aspiration around delivering on our cycle infrastructure, especially because I think if we can get people onto their bikes and off the streets with cars, that is some low-hanging fruit that could happen, that could really be transformative for our city. So if that's one part of this plan that I'd like to see more emphasis on. The other thing that I think is in the next 3 years is the aspiration around public transport. And if we're going to be able to pull off a transition for people to get onto these buses and fill these buses up, it's going to take a real vision that not only from us, but with us, Regional Council and Western Bay Council, to come together and work closely as a team to vision what it might be like if we can get more of our people to actually ride the bus and get a network going that is cheap and safe and affordable. So other than that, though, I'd like to commend this report, and hopefully we'll get some good outcomes.
Councillor Hughes. Councillor Baldock.
Thank you, Mayor. You may wish to start the clock, given I'm going to take a walk down memory lane like Steve Morris began. But look, this is a fantastic initiative, and we are at a great point. It is a multimodal approach which is necessary, but I agree it's not a solution. It's just simply the way we have to provide choices. And it's got so much in it that I can understand some of our residents out there looking at it and thinking, oh no, it's just more paper, you know. Where's my project in there? And oh, it's a business case, and then it's something else and something else. And yet we drive around the city, for those of us who still use vehicles. Mine, of course, is a non-CO2 emitting vehicle. And we just see them so obviously. You know, look, we grade separated that, if we did this, you know, and yes, we'll have some cycleways and some more buses. So I'll go back to a little story of mine, 2001, 2002, when I first became a councillor. I can't say I was a young councillor because I was 48 at the time. And we were just beginning the Harbour Link project, 2002. And the staff came to us with all the plans and things, and it was going to be like 6 years, 7 years. And we were already sitting and looking at all the traffic building up and background here around Marsh Street. It was just a nightmare to get through. And I was not going to accept that, man. We could do it quicker than that. And I actually ended up on the front page of the Bay Times with Baldock's Bridge, which was a suggestion that could solve the problem. We get it built in 3 years. You know, that Harbour Link opened in 2009. And it is just the way it is. You can't do it in a hurry. And when every one of those, there's how many, 100 and something projects in this TSP plan, you know, they just are going to take time. And some of it's agonisingly slow as we go through the process that we need to get the funding from central government. But it's not just that, it's to test all the options and so on. One of the great things in this, of course, is our model that we have, and it's spoken of quite a bit, that we can get flexible a little bit through the way and test things out and see how things are going and tweak things as we go. But this is a 30-year plan. Be patient with us, community. We are committed to improving our transportation corridors, and they still have to be transportation corridors that and primarily are used by cars. But be patient with us. But we have, I hate to say this, but it's like a Trumpism, but you know, we're round the corner. And this project will deliver for us a city. It may not be something we see for 30 to 40 years, but it'll be resplendent with transport options, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Deputy Mayor Salisbury, followed by Councillor Kitty.
Yeah, just briefly, I just want to thank staff for the incredible amount of collaborative work that it's taken to get us to this point. Yeah, and I think it'll provide us a high-level blueprint that will help us understand the investment that we're going to need into our city and region. I think this work will also help us prioritise the projects that are going to be required coming into the future decisions that we have to make. And I think that although none of this is going to be easy and none of it is going to be cheap, but I do believe that it is crucial for the overall well-being of our city and also the function and form as one of New Zealand's fastest growing cities. So I commend this.
Thank you. Councillor Kitty.
Yeah, mine will be short and brief. I'm just really looking forward to all the councils coming together and finding collective unity, I suppose, that we can all move together for the best of our communities. And I think Councillor Hollis wants to speak as well.
Thank you. Councillor Hollis.
I listened to this and I've read the report and I agree with some Steve's comments about paragraph 15. We need these transport corridors open. The reason, and the only reason that we have congestion in this city are the bottlenecks, such as the Haireni Bridge, the Wairau Bridge. TNL is going to reduce or remove the congestion at the Wairau Bridge in about 5 years' time or thereabouts. But until we actually get free-flowing transport corridors moving, even our public transport won't be used, and we will lose the trust of the people in the city to even attempt to use PT. At the moment, for me to go from my house to the Mount by bus is 1 hour and 20 minutes. By car, it is about 20 minutes. No one is going to use the bus. No one is going to use public transport while it is in this state. I see this plan as being good because it opens up our roads, but to produce a public transport plan suitable for a city of 400,000 people when we are 150,000 people is foolish. It is absolutely foolish. We had a report done recently that told us that people's main things that they were looking for was free access by vehicle, transport solution. They weren't looking for a better bus service. They weren't looking for a better way to cycle. They were looking for ways to get their vehicles into town, as that is the way that we have at the moment. In 30 years' time, yes, we have to develop infrastructure that we can convert and revert, but we must make sure that we look after what our residents and our community want. And at the moment, it is not PT. The numbers show that. At 1,000 people a day, including school kids using our buses, that brings it down into the hundreds of people a day using it and not thousands. We need to produce what our city needs, and that is places to park, places and easy access to drive. If we could open up the Haireni Bridge, that would be a good start for the folk out at Manatapua and Welcome Bay, and we're not even discussing it. It doesn't even show up on our documents. We should be doing a lot better, and should be working and encouraging NZTA to get on with the job of fixing State Highway 2 all the way through to where it intersects with the other state highway. I think that this particular plan is good in the main, but I don't think parts of it go far enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Granger, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. I suppose here I've got to have my little tuppence worth as well. Look, all I can say, and it's been mentioned before, it is an initiative, and of course it's supporting the multimodal. I've heard here support our community, and the point that Andrew just made, it touches on me as well, is that what do our community want? The point I've got to make here, yes, it is over a 30-year plan. Larry, thanks for sharing that, but one thing it does, and it takes time. I think it could have been planned better. It takes time. You can't snap your fingers. More buses, more cycle lanes, more walkways, and get the people. Of course, you'll throw them at them and they'll use it. I'm sorry, that's just not the case. It just takes time. And for me, I just felt it could have been planned a lot better that way. It's just coming on a little too thick, and people out there, just like many, turn around to me and say, Bill, it's a waste of time throwing more cycle tracks, it's a waste of time throwing more buses on. I get this time after time after time. Been here 13 years and I still get it. So all I can say is that it just give, and please, patience, you've got to have it. But right at this moment, there should have been, for me, you've still got to cater, sorry, you've still got to cater for the cars, as well as your multimodal.
Thank you, Bill. Councillor Clout.
Yeah, I think it's such an important project, that we have to pretty much all have our say. What I would say is that, we've got over 100 projects here, and in my view, there's no way that we can realistically say to our community that these 100 projects are going to be delivered even in 30 years. But what I do like about it is that we actually have it in a prioritised order. Now, the prioritisation has been done in a very methodical, logical and rational way, and I think that that's testament to the work that the staff particularly have done across council, and of course including our partners, Waka Kotahi and Tangata Whenua also involved as well. So the fact that it's prioritised, I'm looking forward to going down the list starting from number 1 and ticking them off. I feel a real challenge in the funding aspect of it, and so therefore, the concern is we go out to the public and our community and say there's 100 projects. In reality, I'll be rapt if only even half of them are done in 30 years. But it's a fantastic blueprint and something that gives us the direction that we need for our future investment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clout. I have to say there are times when I feel like a voyeur, sitting on a grassy knoll watching meteors rain down on dinosaurs. And I'm pleased to have played some part in moving from the Jurassic Age, I'm talking about the city here, into the 21st century, because this is what the TSP is going to do. And yes, it's born out of smart growth, there's no doubt about that, but it's the doey part, not the hooey part, and it certainly, as Mayor Webber described the other day, it requires Pūtea to have that move, and I think we are a long way down the track of actually being able to do something. I agree with an awful lot of what Councillor Clout said, bar one thing. This has got to be done in 30 years. In fact, it's got to be done in less than 30 years, because the city cannot wait for that long with its growth trajectory. The population growth has, over the last decade or more, 20 years really, has defied all the forecasts. It will continue to do so. And so too will the traffic on the roads, and we've got to find multimodal options, there's no doubt about that. Like Deputy Mayor Salisbury, I wanted to thank the team. We are blessed to have the team we've got, all those that are here, and I include, of course, Dean Kimpton and Neil Mason in that, and their teams. We have some people who, as part of that, are expert in their fields, and we are very, very fortunate to at last have this level, this quality of person who's engaged in the actions of smart growth through the TSP. You will all know that when COVID hit, the whole concept of applying for funding, which happened across the country so rapidly, was done under the headings of employment and housing, or jobs and housing for Tauranga. And the wonderful part about the DUI of this TSP, coming from the HUI of smart growth, is that it's going to do exactly that. There will be jobs, and there's going to be activity, and there's going to be activity going well into the future, and we need to be very thankful for that. The collaboration with government is going to be critical. We have got to maintain a position where we are a partner with government, and most particularly with Waka Kotahi, NZTA, but with other parts of government as well. It is going to become critically important. And lastly, iwi, they are pivotal to this. Not just a part of, but they are pivotal to the success of this, in my view. And I think we have learned, we've got some learnings from this year that we need to really take aboard, and our inclusion with the decision making with iwi has got to be better and got to be more refined, to use a word, and by that I mean we've got to understand their needs a lot better than what we currently do. So thank you for your input into this, councillors. I'll put the... be
Mayor
done.
Timmy, one if I could just ask, please, given the comments you've just made and others have made, if I could have an amendment or an addition to it, but that we actually formally do acknowledge the leadership that the Chief Executive and the staff have played in getting this TSP to where it is. I believe it's worthy of note.
Very, very happy to do that. Councillor Bullock, how do you want that framed?
Well, just
Very good. Can you bring that up, Robin, just so we're all on the same page? Thank you. Just 2 seconds. Thank you.
we're not going to adopt it formally as an amendment, but I would just make the comment that I recall the day when the Chief Executive stood up in Smart Growth and said, Ufti's not going to give us the transport needs we need, and that deserves acknowledging, I believe.
Much, Larry. Thank you for that. Are you happy with that? Yep, very good. All right, Council, I'll put to you A through D. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Abstentions? And carried. Thank you very much. Which moves us to the last item before we have a break, 10.4, the by-election Oromotai Pies Power Ward. Coral, if I could invite you to come and talk us through this. Thank you very much.
Kia ora tātou. So the report is reasonably self-explanatory. I'll just, as a result of Councillor Arbery's resignation, we have a by-election in the Oromotai Pies Power ward. We've had a proposal from our electoral officer, and the timeline is included in your report, with the election date being the 17th of February. Those dates are set down quite specifically in the Local Electoral Act, so it's quite a prescribed process. The decision for you today is around the order of candidate names, and there's 3 choices that you have, and the council has previously chosen random order of names. So I'm assuming that that's probably your choice, but you don't have to make that choice, and the default is alphabetical order by surname. So I think that's it. Happy to answer any questions.
Coral, questions, Council? Councillor Bullock.
Just one, and I would be happy to move it as the sitting ward councillor, if that's okay. But if there was, the other thing that's going on in the background is the potential of a referendum on the Maori ward decision. I'm just wondering if we have any idea of what, in the timing sequence of things, if the community does raise the signatures, and that's an if, that's a big if, really, I think, but if they do, is there any possibility of combining these for certain, cost benefits, but also participation benefits? Or are we past that point now? I wonder if we know.
Yes, I can answer that question. So you do have an opportunity. You've basically got 2 options, really. So you do have an opportunity to, if you want to have a council-initiated poll, which is what I'm assuming that was...
No, I'm not. No, I'm not. That would be, that, in my opinion, that would be overturning a decision we already made. But,
right, okay.
But no, I think it's about whether the community comes up with a demand for a poll.
Oh, okay, sorry.
At what point could they be combined?
Right. So they can. It has to be done by the 20th of November in order to hit the timing. Yes, it can. The members of the public have until the 21st of February next year to initiate a poll, and then we have to do that poll within 89 days. So by 21st of May. So the council still has an option to initiate its own poll, and you've got to the same date. So you don't have to make a decision right now, and if you can wait and do that. But if you did want to do it within the time frame for the by-election, then that would be by the 20th of November.
To be clear, that applies also to the citizens initiated, if we use that term, demand for a poll. If they haven't collected the signatures by the 20th, they still can, but it won't be in conjunction with this by-election.
Councillor Robson.
I thank Councillor Baldock for raising that issue. Obviously, some consideration of the costs to the community. What's the cost savings if we did combine? Council does have the ability, obviously, to, in the light of new situations, revise decisions and positions. Obviously, when the Māori ward decision was made, there was no anticipation that we would lose a councillor, so unfortunately. However, that being the case, what would be the effective savings if we were to combine the two?
I don't have that information. I'm sorry, I would have to go away and get that.
Given the timeframes we're working under, is it possible to get that information to councillors in enough time for us to consider whether it would be prudent use of ratepayers' funds to perhaps go down the council initiated role?
Yeah, we've actually asked for that information, and we would expect it by the end of the week.
Thank you. And just supplementary, if I may, that would give sufficient time, for instance, for the Chief Executive to entertain perhaps a notice of motion in that regard, if the savings was significant. Or my understanding is we could be talking close to 100,000.
I would expect that the information would be available and shared with councillors by the end of this week. It would then be up to councillors or a councillor to consider what action they would take thereafter.
Understand that, but what I'm getting at is there's sufficient time between getting something by the end of the week and a notice of motion process to hit the November 20 deadline. That's what I'm seeking clarification on. Thank you.
Happy to move A, B, 3 and C.
I have a seconder for that. Councillor Robson. Any other discussion?
Just one. Sorry.
I'll just say, look, we do sadly lose a councillor who was, I believe, doing a great job and operating in integrity. But these things happen, and we have to go through this process now. I think that the choice of random order was something we've debated a lot in the past. There's no other real alternative there. That's the one that we have to use. I only raised the question about the other concurrent referendum, perhaps, is that it's not for cost saving, really, because I think that is an entirely different issue. But just to have the discussion, open it up so we know what the timing of it is. I personally hope we carry on with the decision council made.
Thank you. Councillor Robson.
Yeah, it's just the context, I suppose, of there are a number of questions that flow from the situation we find ourselves in here, and I suppose I'd like to put on public record that I don't want to see young people discouraged by some of the comments made in regard to Councillor Arbery's resignation. I think it's important that all sectors of our community, assuming they have legal qualification, are welcomed and supported in this environment. I do think there were comments made by a very young regional councillor which I thought were apposite, germane, if you like, to the situation. So I think, you know, it's also important that people who might be considering standing think about the challenges of this. You know, councillor's role is not an easy one, whether you be a ward councillor or a councillor at large. It is an enormous commitment. You are working with 10 other people who are just as genuine as you are, just as passionate. They may hold very different views. It can be a very challenging environment. I wouldn't like to see this election, this by-election, be used for any purpose other than to bring on board someone who understands the role, who can contribute in an open, impartial way, who remembers that they only swear one oath, and it's not allegiance to another councillor or to a mayor or to a particular kaupapa, but their oath is to serve the city. I just wanted to put a couple of markers down and to say that I welcome if people are qualified in that respect. You know, I encourage all people to consider serving the city in this way. It is enormously rewarding. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? I'll put this to you then, Council. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Abstentions? And carried. Thank you very much. It's now 11:23. Why don't we grab a 15-minute break? So, and round figures back at 25:02. Thank you. Code of Conduct complaint, and I'd like to invite the Chief Executive just to intro into this. Thanks.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillors, look, I'll take the report as read. It's now for Council to consider the findings of the investigation and then determine whether or not they agree and support the findings and any further action that may or may not be required thereafter.
Thank you very much, Marty. I'll invite Councillor Baldock to make his statement, please. Thank you. Larry, do you...
Thank you, Mayor Temby, although I might fall into the trap of calling you Your Honour, as this transforms more into a courtroom right now. I really wish I didn't have to stand here today. I believe this ought to have been handled by an independent committee. But having the fact that it is, I will take the opportunity to defend myself as vigorously as I can, even from the minor breach. And I'll read my statement because this is a very different environment and I want it on record. As to what I say, I've emailed everybody my statement. You can follow it if you like. But on October the 6th, Council made a decision on the Code of Conduct complaint made by Councillor Hollis that was investigated by Campbell Gourley. The decision on October 6th was simply whether to refer the complaint to the Independent Code of Conduct Committee set up for this purpose or for Council to decide on the matter itself. Because the investigator concluded there was only a very minor breach on the low end of the scale, I can understand why some of you chose to deal with the complaint yourselves. However, as the first complaint raised since we agreed to establish the Independent Code of Conduct Committee, it is a bit of a test case and in my opinion highlights some serious problems with our processes that I would like to take this opportunity to address briefly before making comments about the findings of the investigator and Councillor Hollis's remarks. My concerns relate to the principles of natural justice and their violation not only in this complaint but in any future cases that the Council may have to deal with. Two basic components of natural justice are that the person complaining or complained about has a fair opportunity to be heard on the matters in the issue, and I have no complaints about that. I will speak today. The second is that the decision makers, you, are free from bias, including apparent bias or predetermination. Councillor Arbery understood this and was in favour of referring it to the Independent Committee. Sadly, this principled approach to his responsibilities as a City Councillor has been lost to the City. Any observer, and I don't mean our Review and Observer team, but any casual observer must surely be able to see the similarities here to a trial by jury. And preceding selection of a panel of jurors prior to the commencement of any trial, the lawyer for the defendant, which is me in this instance, acting as my own defence lawyer, would have the opportunity to dispense with some of those in the pool of potential jurors if there was any concern about possible bias or predetermination. If you've been called for jury duty, you know and you will have observed how the defence and prosecuting attorneys can dismiss a juror for any reason they may think would impinge on a fair trial without bias. So what do we have here? In the meeting on October 6th, in the short debate, and some comments were made. Firstly, Councillor Robson, as the mover, said, "From what I've seen of this situation, it could have been resolved very quickly with a simple apology." Councillor Clout said he was interested in the evidence but believed the 9 of us, you, could come to a consensus about the way forward. Councillor Morris asked questions about the cost of the independent panel. The cost to the ratepayer was also of concern to Councillors Robson and Councillor Kiddy. Councillor Morris then said that given the independent investigator had said that in his view the alleged offending is at the lower end of the scale, that in his view lend it to option C. If it was perhaps recommended at a higher level, then perhaps it should be independent, but given that it is at a lower level, it seems appropriate. Councillor Kiddy said, "I also agree this seems fairly straightforward, and that we who are elected by our community for much bigger decisions than this can certainly use our expertise and our intelligence to sort this out relatively quickly, easily and at no cost to the ratepayers. Now, Councillor Kitty, you're entitled to your own personal view of your high level of expertise and intelligence, but I, as the defendant here, have some serious reservations about your bias in this case. Options may have changed now that the full report has been reviewed by you all, but these statements made on October the 6th are a cause of concern for me as the defendant in this hearing. For a start, there is far too much talk about the cost. What price does a free society put on justice? And I don't think anyone's considered what the costs of council's time, costs of having this hearing here today, senior staff sitting around, compared to the cost of that independent committee of 3 that might well have dealt with this in a fair way. If costs should be considered, I suggest they should be laid upon the complainant, who in my opinion has made a very frivolous, politically motivated complaint as suggested by the investigator. Secondly, whether the alleged offence is large or small, Councillor Morris, I think I'm entitled to a just decision based on the principles of natural justice. And as to Councillor Robson's suggestion that an apology would have solved it quickly, I somehow don't think he was referring to an apology from Councillor Hollis. And that sounds like predetermination to me. Councillor Clout, it's not what you believe, that the 9, now 8 of you, can find consensus on the way forward. It's about whether I think I'm going to be treated without bias, prejudice or predetermination that must be considered. It is possible you could put any bias aside, but that is not a foregone conclusion. And I'm entitled to be satisfied that those in the position of decision making in this complaint against me are not biased. At the very least, Councillor Robson, Kitty and Morris should not participate, and if they do, I don't think you can expect me to take your decision or judgment nor any penalty imposed seriously. You now have the full report from the investigator and his conclusions. I gave the investigator my written statement to avoid the process of transcribing an interview at some cost to the ratepayer. Had some experience with this. This complaint could not have progressed past stage 1, or should not have progressed past stage 1 in my opinion. Should have gone straight to an independent committee who could then have decided whether it was material or not. I simply raised the question that any normal person would have and still has in regard to the absence of any texts from Councillor Hollis's council work phone and his private phone. The copies of the text files are in the report and you've all seen them and so have the public. The fact that a similar question can be asked about the 17 pages of text between Councillor Morris and Councillor Kitty that were taken from Councillor Morris's phone, but only 1 page of text that were recovered from Councillor Kitty's council phone, is one of the reasons why I would like Councillor Kitty to excuse herself from participation. And the second reason would be her long-standing friendship with the complainant, which would, of course, in any normal trial, raise questions about Councillor Kitty's participating in the decision before you all today. This complaint and the decision you are supposed to make today cannot be clinically separated from the reality of the strained relationships and alliances that have been publicly exposed through the Lagoima revelations of the past 6 months. The backdrop to this complaint are the texts and emails, communications revealing a plot to replace me as Deputy Mayor and drive the duly elected Mayor from office, which must surely cast a shadow over the proceedings today in relationship to natural justice and a fair trial. To quote just a couple of these things from Councillor Hollis's communications, he says, imagine spending the next 2 years with this guy, the Mayor. Ideally, we will apply enough pressure so that this Mayor leaves. My main goal is to send a shot across the bow, which means Larry is not the Deputy Mayor. Bring it on, social media destruction. If there was a way to force a by-election, I would. Then there are the publicly made allegations of my telling committee members to shut up when chairing meetings, or depriving people of democracy, or as Councillor Morris put it, having a leadership style that left something to be desired. If there was evidence for such behaviour, that would be the type of complaint that should be laid as a code of conduct. That behaviour should not go unchallenged because it will affect the reputation of council and the work environment of this organisation. But where was the evidence? And evidence is the third principle of natural justice. If there was evidence, the right process would have been to lodge a code of conduct complaint to be referred to the investigation for investigation by the independent committee established by council. If my leadership as a deputy mayor was so bad, a code of conduct would have been the appropriate response, not a coup hatched by disgruntled colleagues, which included failed mayoral candidates and the involvement from the sidelines of a defeated former mayor trying to create a by-election option for the position of mayor. I am also certain that we would not have had to establish a review and observer team had councillors followed the proper course of action and would have saved a considerable cost to ratepayers. This is all relevant to this code of conduct complaint by Councillor Hollis, who was obviously one of the main instigators in the failed plan. Some of the decision makers here today are some of those who joined with Councillor Hollis in the plot. And I would humbly suggest this cannot be consistent with the principles of natural justice that you will sit to make a decision here today. All this simply proves that the complaints such as this by Councillor Hollis should have been referred to an independent committee that the council has now established right at the outset. Now to my defence. You've had to read a lot in my responses to Mr. Gooley, and I won't repeat the points I made in regard to the Facebook post. In regard to the very minor breach that the investigator recommends, I will say this. What did I do? I simply answered a question honestly when asked by Samantha Motion as to who I was referring to. She did not need me to tell her the answer because it was obvious to everyone. There were only 2 male councillors to choose from, and there were no issues around missing text from Councillor Arbery's file that turned up on someone else's phone. Councillor Hollis was already identified by the facts themselves, and he has done nothing to offer any explanation to alter what the facts are plainly suggesting. In fact, he continues to incriminate himself with his own statements in the media as he attempts to explain himself. On August the 5th, in the Bay of Plenty Times, Councillor Hollis says, and I quote, "I did not delete any text whatsoever. I never used my council phone to send text to anyone, to people. For me, a text is not the way to do business. When I have something to say to somebody, I'll ring them. It's something a colleague of mine pointed out to me right at the beginning, that's the best way to deal with things, to phone people. I won't discuss anything by text, certainly not on my work phone." The first question I'll ask you is this. Was the colleague, Councillor Hollis, referring to Councillor Robson? And is it revealed in the text identified as being from Councillor Hollis's private phone? Document 3 in your file. Between Councillor Robson and Councillor Hollis's private phone, we read, "Hi Andrew, I assume you know there's been a Lagoima request for emails and texts. Cheers, John." Councillor Hollis reply, "Texts." Councillor Robson, "Texts." Councillor Hollis says, "Sorry for that text, for the text, I'll call in a few, ... If only the public had access to all those phone calls, how much more informed they would be about what was going on. The second question, and I won't ask you to raise your hands, is who has received a text from Councillor Hollis at some time from the beginning? Whatever the beginning is, I know I have. And the text files in front of you show that his statements cannot be true, and these, along with other texts some of you have on your own phones, also prove that Councillor Hollis cannot be telling the truth. On August the 5th, in an email to me, which is in the report you've got, Councillor Hollis said, "Happy to be proven wrong, but in my private capacity I am entirely able to write whatever I wish to whomever I wish. It is only in my capacity as a councillor that mattered to the Lagoima. I'm also sure that it's entirely my decision as a councillor whether a text or any other missive is a council business or not." I'm sorry, that's not correct, Councillor Hollis. And from your interview with Campbell Gooley, we know that you now know you have been proven wrong. But Mr. Gooley still arrives at this view. When tested against the principles and the intent of a code of conduct, in this particular set of circumstances, by identifying Councillor Hollis as a person he suspects of acting in a dishonest manner, and in the absence of any definitive proof to support that position, it is my view that Councillor Baldock has breached the TCC code of conduct, albeit in a very minor way. I'm sorry, Mr. Gooley, but I must disagree. There is no absence of proof in this particular set of circumstances. If we accept that in our courts the standard of proof for a civil case is the balance of probabilities and a criminal case beyond reasonable doubt, then the only reasonable conclusion based on all the evidence we have so far is that the proof is there. Texts are missing, and none of the explanations Councillor Hollis has given to me in his email or to the investigator in his interviews, nor to the media in his interviews, explain exactly how the texts have disappeared from his phones that were sent by him, received by Councillor Robson, Clout, Morris and Kitty, and plainly printed in front of us all. A jury would have to conclude that they have been deleted from his work phone or not disclosed on his personal phone. Councillor Hollis further adds to that reasonable assumption and incriminates himself when he declares in public that he never communicates by text, never sends text to people. The evidence proves this cannot be a true statement and only adds further weight to the probability that Councillor Hollis is not being truthful about the missing texts. If the standard of proof is accepted, and it is in our courts, then surely I cannot be guilty of a breach, even a minor one. The front page of the Bay Times already declared my guilt on October the 7th. Baldock breached Code of Conduct inquiry, the front page said. And then the story was on page 2. And what did Councillor Hollis say to the reporter from the Bay Times when I was condemned by the media as guilty, before Council actually made the decision you're supposed to make today? Councillor Hollis said he was happy and he had made his point. I don't think it is worthy of censure or anything, or a slap on the wrist with a wet bus ticket. I was going to bring a wet bus ticket along today, but they're very hard to find now that we have a B card. I had made my point. It's clear there was a breach. He accepted Gurley's finding that the breach was minor. I think my reputation will survive it. Oh, really? Seriously, he thinks his reputation, his integrity will survive. I'm not quite sure about mine. So what was this all about? Is this why the ratepayer had to pay for this? Mr. Gurley, when he stated this report or any analysis would not be complete without referencing the fact that media, whether social media or Main Street channels, are being actively used to facilitate a public airing of differences between councillors. Now remember, Councillor Hollis was the one who said social media destruction. Mr. Gurley continues, it is my view as an external observer that while the motivation to do so publicly would appear to be about upholding principles and holding individuals to account, the reality and true driver more likely lies with the political agendas, and as such these agendas ultimately come at the expense and trust of confidence of the people of Tauranga that can expect from elected members of TCC. Mr. Gurley may be right about political motivations in the lodging of this complaint by Councillor Hollis, but I refute his assumptions about my motives. The issue here is about apparent inconsistencies in the text files between Councillors Clout, Robson, Morris and Kitty and Hollis, and the need for this to be clarified with a suitable answer. Because if there is not a reasonable explanation, it may in fact involve much more than a breach of the Code of Conduct, but rather a breach of the law. And I'm nearly finished, friends, so don't panic. This is not simply a public airing of differences between councillors, as Campbell implies. This could be an offence which carries a maximum penalty of $5,000 under Section 61 and 62 of the Public Records Act, 2005. A potential breach which would involve withholding information from the public about what was really happening in the recent attempt to try and drive the duly elected mayor from office. This is not just about the texts that have been revealed on the phones between elected members, but what communications there may have been between Councillor Hollis and third parties that have not been seen by the public who are entitled to under the Legoima requests. I think Councillor Hollis calls that transparency. When I raised these concerns with the Ombudsman's office and was referred to the office of the Chief Archivist, I received advice that TCC needs to be involved in the investigation as they are responsible for the stewardship of public records. On that advice, I formally requested the Chief Executive to investigate these matters and have been advised that in order for that to proceed, someone must lodge a Code of Conduct complaint. Today, I will therefore give the CE that formal complaint and will await the results of the investigation. Given that Councillor Hollis said a proper investigation was what he wanted when he lodged his complaint, I expect he'll be very happy about the next step in the process. Forensic investigation of the phones or through data banks of Spark and Vodafone may be the only way to properly investigate this matter. When I initially contacted the Office of the Ombudsman, one of the cases they reminded me of was the case involving the former Prime Minister John Key, who deleted text between himself and a journalist in relation to the ponytail incident in a cafe, some of you may remember. A complaint was laid and the texts were recovered forensically. In this digital age, nothing much in reality is erased simply by hitting a delete button. Councillor Hollis lodged a Code of Conduct complaint when he claimed I was publicly disrespecting him and perhaps even defaming his integrity as an elected member. After speaking to the Bay of Plenty Times, Councillor Hollis said he felt his integrity was being impugned and the suggestion he had deleted text was borderline defamatory. I do not believe as politicians we should use the Code of Conduct to try and clear our names from the abusive and false allegations that we must endure in our public service. The Code of Conduct process, and this is my final page, so breathe deeply. The Code of Conduct process should not deal with the defamation claims, borderline or not, when we as politicians feel we have been disrespected. The courts exist for that purpose, and the cost will then be borne not by ratepayers. Of course, it is entirely appropriate for it to be used if comments are ever made by elected members about staff or members of the public. While I've often been labelled as the Code of Conduct guy, I've only ever lodged 3 of them in 8 years of service in this council. And no code of conduct complaints that I have lodged in the past were about defending myself. One was about defamatory comments in an email by a councillor that implied the chief executive and a general manager were allowing themselves to be manipulated by an elected member. And another about defamatory comments made by a councillor in a council meeting about the council appointed chair of the technical advisory group. I imagine some will try and imply that the code of conduct I'm lodging today is a bit of a tit-for-tat response to Councillor Hollis, but I can only do my best to assure you that's not the case. Just think for a moment how many code of conducts I could have lodged if I went through all the emails and texts that were revealed through the Lagoima requests and decided I would try and use the code of conduct process to defend being publicly disrespected and perhaps even defamed as an elected member. To conclude, I will say again that there are many reasons why this hearing today should not be proceeding because of the serious breaches in the principles of natural justice that I've raised, unless some members withdraw. The second option, of course, would be to dismiss the complaint entirely as covered in option 2 of the report and await the full investigation that will commence under the Code of Conduct that I will lodge. The process can and should involve an external agency, and in our Code of Conduct processes, referred to as Step 4, there are clear procedures to refer things to independent agencies that have the necessary powers and authority to obtain phones and conduct forensic investigation to bring everything to the light. I will conclude with this quote from my colleague Councillor Robson today, who just inspired me no end when he said, in regard to the annual report, if we ask the question, open, honest, transparent answers should be given. That was all I was doing, and I have not yet had one from Councillor Hollis. So thank you for your time, and I'll leave you to your deliberations.
Thank you, Councillor Baldock. I just need, on the basis of some of the revelations that you've given, I just need to consult with the Chief Executive for a moment. Given the statement read by Councillor Baldock, there is an opportunity for those councillors who consider that they are conflicted to identify themselves now.
To probably clarify a few things here. So conflicted because I know Andrew, is that, and have known him for...
Kitty, you heard Councillor Baldock's statement.
Sorry, I was
in
just
terms of
asking...
natural justice, you know.
Sorry, I was just asking for some help.
Well, it's... Councillor Cloud.
Thank you. My question does relate to process. Given that Councillor Baldock is going to or has issued a code of complaint, a code of conduct complaint against Councillor Hollis, which he's just revealed to us today, and given that that will obviously clearly require an investigation, would it be prudent to combine this previous investigation with the new investigation? And if so, if we felt that it was appropriate, that then went to an independent hearings panel, would that be one course of action? I'm just trying to look at how we might move forward on this today.
In response to that, I might ask Nick Swallow to make comment, but the investigator's findings and in his report, he distinguishes, if you like, the facts that may be the case as distinct from the actions of Councillor Baldock, and he's drawn a distinction between, if you like, Councillor Baldock's actions and other facts that may or may not have occurred. So, Nick, do you want to?
Certainly, through the chair, I think the Chief Executive summary is a fair one. Campbell Gourlay notes quite correctly that the scope of this hearing is ultimately determined by the complaint itself. And so there's always going to be a question, I suppose, of wider context, but ultimately the boundaries of what we are doing here today is Councillor Hollis's complaint. And I note that Campbell Gourlay summarises this on page 13. He says whether or not Councillor Hollis has deleted text messages or the reason why they have not been identified when examined during the Lagoima process falls outside the terms of reference for this complaint. And as I said, that is ultimately because the complaint defines what this hearing is about. So I would be wary of, I guess, combining a particular complaint on the basis of a separate complaint, because that is ultimately not really what the process is designed to do. I guess practically speaking, you'd have a number of other issues as well, because as Councillor Baldock has pointed out, there could be any one of a number of different points raised in relation to these deputy mayoral text message matters. So I would suggest that this complaint be dealt with here today rather than looking to combine them.
Councillor Robson.
Your Worship, Your Honour. A question about process, if I may. This is obviously not a process that lends itself to traditional standing orders. I wonder whether it's possible to suspend them, so there might be some discussion around both the report, obviously, and the statement by Councillor Baldock. Would that be appropriate, or would you be comfortable with that? Because I feel there may be some points raised and some discussion. We need to consider this. If we are to be seen as a jury, then normally we'd be sequestered and then there would be conversation, not some statement, simple one only, and then some vote. So is it possible to do that?
Well, it is possible. It begs the question, though, as to what members feel about this. From my perspective, I'd like to see it kicked a touch. I think it's spurious at best, and there's an opportunity to do that.
I
That's the will
suppose
of the council.
If I can respond, I suppose that would be my point. If we're able to have a conversation, people can express a view, and you can get some clarity, obviously as chair, about where or what, or perhaps put a motion. I mean,
So
all I'm saying is there probably needs to be a discussion, and
You're looking to
standing
do that
orders
now?
preclude that. I think we need to have a talk about the report, and we need to have a talk about the statement made by Councillor Baldock. It seems not unreasonable to discuss the issues in front of us.
Look, I'm very happy to do that and do it now. Do we need to suspend standing orders for this purpose?
A motion to.
I'm happy to second it. Oh, sorry, Kelvin, you second it. That's fine. Thank you. All those in favour? This is about the suspension of standing orders in order for us to have this discussion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, abstentions, and carried.
So, I mean, someone needs to start the conversation. I suppose I have some form having been the subject of more than one code of conduct complaint and having been investigated by Campbell Gourlay. I'm personally, just to contextualise the comments I'm about to make, not a fan particularly of the code of conduct process. I've never used it myself, despite, you know, if one wanted to sort of, you know, look at the rules and find cause, despite, I believe, being able to identify cause. It's not a process I favour. I believe that it does set us up in a situation where potentially we could all be precluded on the basis that we've all at some point voted with someone and against someone, all of us in every situation. So if we start going down the, you know, that route, nothing happens. I note that when I was the subject of code of conduct complaints, many of the arguments that have been made today were not made. As a matter of fact, the process was used, you know, enthusiastically to attempt to prosecute a particular end. I make no judgment on whether that end was, you know, I make no judgment on the motives of the person who took the code of conduct complaints. I just observed there was a process and they chose to use it. In the same way, there was a process for, you know, effectively requisitioning recalling effectively a deputy mayor or whatever. There's a process and people are entitled to use process. And I think we get into really difficult territory if we try and look inside too much the hearts and the motivations of people when they make decisions. It's difficult ground. And while there may be some banter around things and some people may make remarks about transport Marxists, you know, we have to allow some leeway in political discourse. My understanding is the situation is outlined by the legal advice we have in this room, and I realise I could be challenged on relying on the legal advice I've received in this room, having myself challenged the quality of legal advice I've received in this room on numerous occasions, and therein lies the rub. But my understanding of the advice is that we should consider this today, that the complaint is effectively frames the discussion to a large extent. And while there may be other issues raised, they should be treated and addressed in a separate forum using separate processes, even some that might be similar to this one. I would seek some clarification. I don't know how to get it. I followed Councillor Baldock's statement, as ever articulate, you know, well argued. I use those words deliberately, well argued, articulate. But at the end of Councillor Baldock's statement, what I have in front of me reads differently to the words I heard in the chamber. And I just wondered if I could get some clarity from perhaps Councillor Hughes or Councillor Salisbury, Deputy Mayor Salisbury. The statement from Councillor Baldock that I have in front of me that I've been emailed closes with a paragraph that reads, "The other option would be to dismiss the complaint entirely as covered in option 2 in the report and await the full investigation that commence under the code of conduct from myself, Councillor Hughes and the Deputy Mayor." Those words weren't used by Councillor Baldock in his statement, which is live streamed. Can I get some clarity around where we sit with this other code of conduct process? And I mean, obviously ask that in the context of concepts around that have been raised around exclusion and predetermination, whatever else. But can I get some clarity about that? Because those are not the words that were read by Councillor Baldock when he said he was reading his statement. I don't know whether I need to get them from Councillor Baldock. Again, I don't know what the process is. I hope we sort of adopt an inquisitorial rather than an adversarial approach to this and try and find some truth rather than try and win points.
I received the same version as you did by email last night and rang Councillor Baldock this morning to say that I was not putting my name to a code of conduct complaint on this issue. So that was the first time I had seen that as well, was in that letter last night.
I was the same. I rang this morning because I hadn't read what he had put, and I read it today, and I didn't want to become involved. I wanted to be in this process here.
Thank you for that clarification.
And I guess it's probably like you, John, is that I don't feel for, I guess, issues of this nature where we have all of us either been a part of or have been accused or defamed or insulted or had allegations made about us far more serious than this in this triennium. I don't believe that a constant flow of code of conducts are necessarily the best in the best interests of our city as a way of dealing with these. But I guess my concern with this particular one, the only question I guess that I really raise is if there is, you know, we did discuss about having a whistleblower clause in the code of conduct, and I guess the danger with this is if someone does believe that there is actually an ethical breach of some form, for that person to not have the freedom to raise that, to be slapped, could essentially be silencing a valid canary in the coal mine. And so my concern with this is more around that aspect of it, I guess.
I mean, I think the exploration of this is actually quite important. The challenge is, you know, what's the purpose of the code of conduct, I suppose, ultimately. And this goes back to frequently what we talk about, which is what outcome are we seeking to achieve here? And obviously it's not the stifling of difference of opinion, but more the stifling of how that difference or that concern is expressed. My understanding of the process with the code of conduct is that if you have an issue with something one of your colleagues has said, the starting point is to approach your colleague about it. Now, sometimes that's difficult. Clearly, this triennium, there have been situations where people have, for various reasons, had some level of discomfort sitting down and talking together, and hopefully we're making some progress in that regard, although we do seem to have some ways to go. But that being the case, should that fail, I suppose then there is a process that we have all collectively endorsed about what next steps a member may take if they feel strongly enough about a situation. That's why we find ourselves here today. My understanding is Councillor Hollis did approach Councillor Baldock, but they couldn't come to some agreement about how to reconcile what Councillor Hollis felt was, for whatever reason, for whatever evidence, an attack. The process has gone through a process that I've been through where the chief executive has had to examine it for purposes of, you know, is this frivolous or whatever. The chief executive has clearly made a judgment that this should go to an independent investigator. As I have some experience with Mr. Gourlay, he was the independent investigator. In this case, his view is there is a breach, albeit quite minor. I suppose my view is we should proceed largely on that basis and avoid turning this into a much bigger and more conflicted situation than it should otherwise be. With regard to the position of predetermination is frequently discussed in local government circles. It comes with a very high bar. That is to say, you can advocate very strongly, for instance, for Māori wards or a museum on Cliff Road and say, you know, it's the future of the city hangs on it and I will be campaigning on it. But that does not preclude you from participating in the debate. The test is your mind closed to new information, evidence, argument, etc. And in that sense, you know, that's the test for all of us. If we start going again too much down that route, I don't like the code of conduct route. If we go down the predetermination route, you get to the situation that someone who campaigns on cycleways suddenly is forced to recuse themselves from any discussion on cycleways because clearly they are predetermined in where they're going to vote. So it's unreasonable, I think, the predetermination route. I mean, I think we should just stay on brief, read the report, acknowledge the findings, and make a decision on what the appropriate remedy should be. That's where I'm currently sitting, but happy to yield and hear from others.
Thank you, Councillor Robson. Councillor Morris, followed by Councillor Clout.
Yeah, I suppose I've got a question, a long-winded question, as usual, around process. I was listening with interest to the Dunedin City Council Code of Conduct hearing yesterday, in which Councillor Vandervis was found to be in breach of the Code of Conduct because of the aggression that he displayed towards a female colleague. And the Mayor commented during that hearing that Councillor Vandervis had the opportunity to double down on his alleged victim through the Code of Conduct hearing process, but that the alleged victim had no right of reply or opportunity, in terms of natural justice, because if we're talking about natural justice. And I am concerned because I have been an observer of Code of Conduct, and in my limited experience, I've seen other matters prosecuted through, the alleged perpetrator. God, that's a horrible word. The alleged breacher of the Code of Conduct. I've seen people go well outside the matter on the table and introduce many other matters and actually double down on their alleged victim or victims, and that certainly played out in Dunedin. And so I think they have the same or very similar Code of Conduct to us, which came out of LGNZ. And I just wonder, in terms of natural justice, in the future, do we have the opportunity to amend our Code of Conduct so that the complainant and also the defendant, or the respondent, that's more like it, both have the opportunity to speak in terms of natural justice? Because it does seem odd to me that one speaks and the other doesn't. The risk in that is, of course, instead of having one person going off the reservation, you actually have two. So, can we do that?
My answer would be yes. Essentially, council determines the policy, decides the policy, and you can determine that, yes.
Thanks very much, Marty. Councillors Clout and then Hughes.
Thank you. Just sort of trying to find a way through this mess, because I think it is a mess. One possible, I'm just trying to think of scenarios. One scenario is that we do find Councillor Baldock breached the Code of Conduct, albeit in a minor way, and we then call for an apology. I'm just thinking about that as a scenario. What may happen then, more than likely would happen, is that Councillor Baldock would refuse to give an apology. I guess the question is, what do we do about that collectively? And do we just let it hang in and that becomes the end of the matter? I'm just interested in, what our collective view would be on that scenario, because that's kind of the scenario that I see playing out on this particular case is the most likely. I'm just interested in everyone else's opinion. Thank you.
Happy to have a crack at an answer, if that's all right. I think I'm trying to be practical here, that to me it was patently obvious that when Ms Motion was asking Councillor Baldock who he was referring to, as he said himself, that it was only one of two male councillors, and it was not Councillor Arbery. So it's obvious who the person was. I don't think anybody would argue that. But more importantly, the process of natural justice is not being applied here. And folks, the fact that some of you don't see yourselves as conflicted shows, to me, an extraordinary lack of awareness that I worry about hugely. And so given the two conditions present, and they are exactly that in my mind, I'm strongly advocating that this nonsense of a code of conduct brought by Councillor Hollis against Councillor Baldock is discharged without any further waste of ratepayers' money. That would be my recommendation to you.
Thank you, Mayor Powell. I would like to have a talk about what Calvin said, because I think that's just one easy, quick way that we can get through this, is a simple apology, and then we can all move on. I'm hoping this doesn't go any further, not only for our ratepayer, but for our observer team also here watching this. It's a really tough situation. I do understand that the code of conduct and the policy can be changed, which I think obviously is really important, but I suppose we really want to be trying to achieve no code of conducts in our period of time, if we can, you know, working together collectively as a team, which is what we're all trying to get towards, you know, head towards doing. And this is probably not going to achieve that for ourselves as a team, or anything in front of the community. I suppose I'm quite upset about this now. To be honest, I didn't see this coming. I don't see that I have a conflict of interest with anything apart from the facts that are out there in front of me. Like many people say, you know, we'll go with the recommendation. We employ Cameron Goulet for a specific reason. He has come back with his report. That is great. If there's a conflict of interest, I'm happy to step out of the room if it's going to save another code of conduct and what could be a hell of a lot of more money to the cost of a ratepayer for something that could have been easily solved many months ago with a, hey, I'm sorry, let's sit down, let's have a coffee, which I understand in the report was offered to Councillor Baldock and to Councillor Hollis. And, you know, realistically, again, we are all adults here. To go into a room to have a coffee, to have this outcome could have been extremely easy had they been able to sit down together and do that. That was all I was hoping for.
Councillor Hughes.
I feel like over the course of the last few months, there could have been quite a lot of I'm sorries and apologies from a number of occasions that have happened with this team to other people, and to put somebody on the spot now because they've been pulled up and put in this position just makes them take the rap basically in the eyes of the media, and I don't think that, and therefore in our community, which I don't think is fair based on all the other stuff that's been going on in the last little while. I think that, as Councillor Robson points out, this will just, if we take this will just end up with another code of conduct. It's a minor situation, and it's not fair for one person to take the rap for a minor code of conduct when there's a whole lot of other opportunities that were this minor in the last little while to have been pulled up as well. So in my view, I believe that we should also allow this to be kicked for touch, and I also wonder whether, unfortunately, Councillor Kitty, I wonder whether in this case you might be a little bit conflicted because you are a good friend of Andrew's, and I don't mean that disrespectfully, but myself, I don't mean that disrespectfully at all. There's nothing, and I just mean that if you're a friend of someone and you're in a jury of any kind, if you're a good friend and you have family dinners together, you're not expected to be in the same room to vote. I don't think that that's. I think that that's entirely appropriate. That person is not in the room at that time. A few weeks ago, I was pulled up when it suited you, John Robson, in respect to what might have been a conflict of interest for me, and I said fair enough, I'll step down and I won't vote, and I took that responsibility seriously, and I think that we should all look across and decide when it's not appropriate for us to vote.
Councillor Granger.
Yeah, thank you. Look, all I can say is simply this. It's so sad that it's got to this stage. The time that I've been here, 13 years now, I've never seen anything like this in the past. But it has, and it's evolved, and so be it. It's got to the stage where an independent investigator's come on board, And he simply says this: at the point where Councillor Baldock chose to name Councillor Hollis in the Bay of Plenty Times article on 5th of August 2020 in relation to the others, rather than proven behaviours, a breach of the code of conduct has occurred. I'll say it again. A breach of the code of conduct has occurred. Now, no matter how big or small it is, it has occurred. We've got to the stage which I didn't want to go down this track at all, but it is. We've got there. This is where we are right now. This is the point that's been made. So in my eyes, simply as what we used to do in the past, I wish had occurred. If your councillors have got some issues, go into a room, shut the door and sort it out. But this hasn't happened. So where we are at now, I can see it as simply this. The Independent Commission has stated that I feel at the end of it all, an apology has to occur. Simple apology. Sad to say, but that's how I see it.
Thanks, Bill. I would just say, as a response to that, that we do have an opportunity to determine whether we concur or disagree with the findings of the independent investigation. So there is that option to us, despite the fact that at the moment, Mr. Gourlay has, and you, as you quite rightly say, determined that there is a code of conduct to answer. We don't have to accept his findings, though.
Absolutely, but in my eyes, it's got to the stage, Tenby, to say, well, okay, what do I do? How do I look at it? And that, to me, is what I see. And that's only my personal view.
Motion, I'm prepared to move. The motion will be pretty much in line with the recommendations here, that the Council A, and I appreciate some of these things have already happened, so receives the report, Code of Conduct complaint, and notes the findings of the independent investigator, B, and C, obviously hears from the member or receives the report, the member from whom the complaint has been made. D, notes that the complainant and respondent take no part in discussions or voting on this matter. E, determines whether to concur or disagree with the findings. So, determines to agree with the findings of the independent investigation that the subject of this complaint did not blah blah, and 2, and 3, and 4, and that F, that the council determines that a breach of the code of conduct did occur, but no further action be taken. I don't know whether I have a second.
I'll second that.
And I'll speak to it, obviously, if I am able to.
The discussion's finished. Before we do this, John, that's very helpful, thank you. We should go back into standing orders.
Happy to move.
Happy to second, or Tina, you can second, thank you very much. All those in favour of going back into standing orders, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition to that? Thank you very much. We are back in standing orders now.
Just a point of order, Mayor Powell, I will remove myself from this discussion.
Thank you, Councillor Kitty. Do you wish to speak to the now substantive motion?
Look, speaking to it, I think we find ourselves in a difficult situation. I don't think the situation will be any less difficult if we use an independent group. There will be questions over the relationships, prior, present, potentially future, with people who are put on an independent group. This is a product of, I talked, there's a bit of a theme here. There's a river. There are things that happened 2 years ago, 1 year ago, during the election campaign, subsequent to the election campaign, during the election, ongoing. And we have a choice about whether we try to stop the tit-for-tat nature of things. But that doesn't give us the right to rewrite history. Right? There are a number of situations in the what I call Lagoima dump where there were unmirrored texts. And when I talk about the Lagoima dump, I feel reasonably comfortable, although I take on board the comment that, as a local reporter said, the fact that, John, you weren't seen to disparage your colleagues
in texts and emails doesn't make you a good person. It just makes you someone who's capable of understanding the process, which I think should be at least part of the qualification of being a councillor, quite frankly. But there are a number of situations in what I understand came from the Lagoima dump, and I have not read everything that was dumped by the Lagoima process, a process which I would challenge, but not via a code of conduct and not via a court of law. But I think we made a very generous ruling in terms of how much we dumped. But in that dump, there are a number of situations where there were not mirrored texts, including texts received and recorded in Councillor Baldock's phone from the Mayor and the current Deputy, but were not seen in what was produced for public for them. The challenge here is that the process itself, I think, was fraught with risk. We tried to do something, I think, which was probably at the bleeding edge of addressing a Lagoima request. I think there was an error on the side of transparency, and it probably didn't serve the city well. But it got us to where we are now. My attempt to draw a line, particularly with F, is to try and avoid a situation where people feel that they have been, as I think as Councillor Hughes points out, you know, that this could become a really quite Pyrrhic situation, which results in an eye for an eye situation, which leaves, you know, pardon the pun and mixed metaphors, but the whole council blind. Blind with rage, blind with anger, blind with ill discipline, blinded to the value of their colleagues. Something I think that we've struggled with since before the election. I think we've struggled to recognise the good in the people that were elected. So what I'm trying to do here is to say, let's accept what the investigator says within the constraints as defined and outlined by our legal advice. There is a complaint, it's circumscribed in this way, it's been investigated, this is the finding, but can we be big enough to say, let's not take any further action, let's draw a line under this. I would really commend that approach to try and not so much close this down, but to try and move us in a more positive direction. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Kelvin.
Yeah, as Bill said just before, you know, and I share his concern that we've even got to this point, and I'm really saddened that we, you know, haven't been able to gel as a team. It's not to say that we can't make decent, good decisions, because I think we are, so I think I want to underline that point. I take on Councillor Robson's view that, you know, we've had this investigated. I'm happy to accept the findings of the independent investigator, noting that Councillor Baldock's breach is at the lower end of the scale. I'm absolutely confident that if we asked Councillor Baldock to apologise, he wouldn't. Therefore, in my mind, that's the same sort of outcome as the proposed F, which is effectively take no further action. I shudder to think how the public in our community would view us if we went down the track of re-litigating this through an independent, you know, commission, as it were. And that would cost thousands and thousands of ratepayers' dollars, which, you know, I just can't justify. So, in my mind, we need to put an end to this. We need to address this specific issue. I'm sure Councillor Baldock is listening somehow, either live or on stream later, and I would ask Councillor Baldock, you know, respectfully to withdraw his code of conduct so we can move on. Using the river metaphor, at the moment I feel we're riding some pretty rocky rapids. I'm hoping that we can get to the point where we have some very smooth water and we can all be rowing paddling the waka in the same direction as a team. Thank you.
Anyone else? Just to let you know, I will not be supporting this. I think it's a spurious nonsense, and the whole thing. And while I appreciate Councillor Robson's practicality in trying to get it off the table right now and deal with it accordingly, I just think it's an absolute and utter nonsense. Item parts 10 if you wish. Councillor Morris.
I think it's important that we confine
debate on this subject to the resolutions in front of us and the finding of the independent investigator. There are a lot of other matters that I think in due course will be discussed, unfortunately, because I don't think some people have the ability to let go, but that is what we are faced with. It does concern me that the allegation I've heard from Councillor Robson about text messages being absent on other elected members' phones but present on Councillor Baldock's phone, and yet the allegation was made about one councillor, and that is Councillor Hollis. So I do wonder whether this is less of a quest for truth and perhaps more political in nature. Otherwise, we may have seen Councillor Baldock referring to the text messages he received from other elected members which were not recorded on their phones. And I make no comment as to the propriety or not of those elected members. I just say that it does make it look rather political. So I do support the findings, and in addition to that, I hope that Councillor Baldock will, in his own way, apologise for breaching the Code of Conduct. I think he is an honourable man, he has it within him to do that, but I think that given the nature of the complaint, I think that this committee requiring that would be a step too far. So I vote in support.
Anyone else before I put the motion to you in parts? So Council Part A is...
Not for the first time, and this is where I sort of take issue with minute taking it, so I know it's a challenge. And often you find yourself with a seconder who seconds your motion and speaks to it, but you're discomforted by something your seconder says. And that's where I find myself now. The seconder spoke of agreeing that no further action should be taken, largely on the grounds that he didn't believe that the request for an apology would be acknowledged and responded to. That's not my rationale here. I am not proposing F because of what Councillor Baldock may or may not do, depending on how F is phrased. I'm proposing F to make the point that this is a very minor breach, and in the context of working together, it was ill-judged. So here I am far more in Councillor Hughes's court, that we shouldn't be seeking here, right, to, put the burden of reconciliation on one councillor when there's quite a few conversations that some have already been had, and perhaps some more need to be had. But hey, look, let's see what the Review and Observer team recommend going forward. I think we've got a report coming in a couple of weeks. But I just wanted to make it clear in my right of reply that the reason I'm going with F is got nothing to do with how I feel Councillor Baldock might respond to a request for an apology. It's got everything to do with asking him to apologise in a minor situation such as this decontextualises this to the point of absurdity. There's no need to ask for an apology. Let's draw a line and move on. I would ask people to vote for, if they can't vote for all of it, at least the substantive parts of this so the line can be drawn. Thank you.
Councillor, I'll put to you then recommendations A, that we receive the report. All those in favour? I'm against. B, notes the findings. And I'm against. Here's from the member against whom the complaint has been made, which we've done. So that's already done. So I take it that's unanimous. Notes that the complainant and the respondent take no part in discussing, which has been done. Thanks, Robin. And then E, determines to agree with the findings of the independent investigation. I'm happy to take that as parts 1, 2, 3 and 4 of E together. All those are you happy to do that? So E1, and I just the wording is did not constitute a breach of code of conduct, just so we're clear on this. And determines to agree with the findings of the independent. All right. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Okay, thank you. 2 does not, does constitute, which obviously. E2. All those in favour of E2? Against? I'm against. So, hands up those that are against. 3 of us. That the seriousness of the breach is lower at the lower end of the scale. All those in favour? Aye. And while finding the complainant is substantiated, it is not intended in any way to diminish the view or position held by Councillor Baldock. All those in favour? Aye. Which leads us to F, that the Council determines the breach of code of conduct and goes on to say no further action shall be taken. All those in favour? Aye. Aye. Thank you. Is anybody against? I saw ayes all round. Let me start that one again. All those in favour of of F, I beg your pardon, please say aye. Anyone against? And I take it there's no abstention, so that's carried unanimously. Thank you. I will. I will just about to do that. Thank you. If I can get, I'm just going to move that we go into public excluded. If I can get a seconder, please. Kelvin, thank you very much. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. And it's lunchtime.